Who will read the citation, we are going to confer an honorary degree upon Dr. Rattan Lal. So if I can have you come to.
Good afternoon. Today, Gustavus Adolphus College honors Dr. Rattan Lal, Distinguished Professor of Soil Science at Ohio State University, Director of the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center, and contributor to the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. The IPCC is comprised of scientists from around the world who, in the words of the Nobel Committee, build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change and lay the foundations for the measures that are needed to counteract such change. Professor Lal served in the process that led to the third assessment report published in 2001. Professor Lal's work with IPCC was built on the foundation of a lifelong international career studying soil, advocating for its conservation, and supporting others who study soil and soil conservation. Following a master's degree in soil at the Indian Agricultural Research Institute and a doctorate in soils at Ohio State University, Professor Lal served at the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture in Nigeria before joining the faculty at Ohio State, which has been his academic home ever since, even as his work has had an international scope. Professor Lal has served on numerous national and international study commissions on soil and soil conservation. He has visited almost 100 countries in an official capacity, sharing his expertise, and has authored or contributed to over 2,000 academic publications. Yeah. Recognizing his contributions, Ohio State named him a Distinguished University Professor of Soil Science in 2001. While many of his publications have focused on broader soil conservation topics, he has been a major contributor to the scientific literature exploring how soil can store excess greenhouse gas emissions and advocate for how proper soil management can be a climate change solution. Professor Lal has given testimony on this topic to the US Congress 7 times and helped organize more than 20 international conferences related to the topic. In 2001, since 2001, he's served as the director of the Ohio State Carbon Management and Sequestration Program. While Professor Lal's individual accomplishments are impressive, to say the least, it's also clear he is a collaborator and a mentor. Overall, he has mentored 300 soil science professionals, ranging from international trainees and graduate students to postdoctoral fellows and visiting scientists. For his contribution to soil science and carbon sequestration as a way to mitigate climate change, Gustavus Adolphus College is both honored and privileged to bestow an honorary degree upon Dr. Rattan Lal. Upon recommendation of the faculty, Dr. Lal is presented for the degree of Doctor of Science, honoris causa.
For your unwavering efforts to understand and inform the world about soil, Gustavus Adolphus College is privileged to bestow an honorary degree upon you, Dr. Lal. Now, by the virtue of the authority vested in me by the Board of Trustees of Gustavus Adolphus College, and upon the recommendation of the faculty and the approval of the Board of Trustees, I hereby confer upon you, Dr. Rattan Lal, the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, and honors pertaining thereto. pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. President Bergman, faculty, staff, colleagues, this is one of the greatest honor of my professional career. When I learned it on Friday, it was really a total surprise. I did not know how to express my sincere appreciation for this tremendous honor. I would like to thank all those who made it possible, President Bergman, Vice President Tim Kennedy, several other colleagues from the faculty, Barb Taylor, those who have really helped me since I've been here, including Jim Tense, Lisa Hedke, Laura Triplett, Amy Koske, who has been, she even met me at the airport, and the two graduate students, Chloe Shaw and Bree Jell, many others who made this entire trip a very pleasant and a memorable event. Listening to colleagues this morning, Dave Montgomery, and this afternoon, Claire Chanou, the scientific quality of their presentation and what is going to happen from several other colleagues today, I must say this is a uniquely impressive and superbly organized conference. It's a great privilege and honor to be part of this great event. I thank you very much for the opportunity and the privilege. I wanted to follow up on where Dave Montgomery and Claire Chanou were talking this morning and this afternoon, the soil life nexus, the theme of this conference. I'm borrowing the words from Charles Kellogg of USDA. Essentially, all life depends upon the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have indeed evolved together. Rhizosphere may be the only site in the universe where the death is transformed into life. And I think that's a very important aspect of soil that we should remember, and the soil which has those divine capacity and power to transform death into life, full of roots, microbes, transformation of organic matter into pedospheric processes that generate life. We had last evening possibility of taking a picture in front of soil profile called soil solum, different horizons, the top part very dark because of the humus content decreasing with depth, but still up to 3 meters or so, there is a large amount of organic matter content. So monitoring this only for the surface 4 to 8 inches is not adequate to assess the total carbon stock. Different layers of the soil, that is what governs the different processes that transform the biomass into life-supporting process that retains water, that retains nutrients, and all those processes. In a farmer's language, while Claire mentioned many ecosystem services, soil as a reservoir of carbon, plant nutrients, fresh water, biodiversity, is the interaction of the pedosphere and other ecosphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, the lithosphere. That's really the basis of life. I think from a farmer's point of view, they talk about these layers in a different perspective. One of the common myths is sand over clay, money thrown away. Clay over sand, money in hands. I think this is the farmer's experience of how they view this layering. And as a scientific community, we should be able to relate what farmers perceive as their interpretation of the soil. That soil with the divine power, its characteristics began to change dramatically with the evolution of agriculture about 10 to 12 millennia ago. Initially, perhaps a digging stick was the tool, or dropping seed in a small furrow or a little hole in the ground and putting the soil back on top of the seed with the toe of the foot, which eventually evolved into what we call urd. And this urd was a paddle-shaped digging tool developed about 6 to 8 millennia before present. Eventually, this urd got mechanized. Here is a picture 3200 BC that I got from the British Museum, from a place not too far from where I was born, but is now in present-day Pakistan. You notice the furrows dug up from under a sand dune, strict in straight line and parallel, 3,200, with the help of that urd, which eventually got mechanized. In this country, the mechanization of plowing came with a great president, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson designed the plow in 1784, the so-called moldboard plow. This plow was patented in 1796 by Charles Newfold. And this plow was marketed and sold by a blacksmith named John Deere and his son Charles. So now you know how it began. And this plow was the one that in the Homestead Act led to the transfer of agriculture from the East Coast all the way up to the Rocky Mountains and beyond. Not only in the US, of course, this plowing process really had several impacts. We call them Anthropocene, when the human force is even greater than that of the geologic force. In the year 1 AD, the population was 200 million. In 1800, when Malthus was born, it was not quite 1 billion, and he was concerned what will happen. In 2000, we were almost 7 billion. In 2018, we have 7.6 billion people, destined to be 9.8 billion by 2050, 11.2 billion by 2100. To feed these people, the cropland area was 130 million hectares, changed to 420 by 1800, about 1,400 million hectares at the moment. The pasture land from 100 million hectares, now about 3.5 billion hectares. We have an irrigated land area of about 350 million hectares, globally speaking. So the land has been transformed by that simple digging stick converted to urd to a plow, with the impact beyond the plow zone, the global impact of erosion that Dave Montgomery talked about this morning, both by water and wind. And this erosion has very high tastes. It takes on a good part of the soil, the organic matter and clay. It has no taste for sand and gravels. They are left behind. Something that impoverishes the soil, and that's what technically we call enrichment ratio. And that eventually led to the dust bowl of the 30s, which I do not need to explain, the Steinbeck grapes of wrath, and many other things. Hugh Hammond Bennett, who called the congressman, come to the window and see the dust storm, the soil from Midwest blowing over the capital, leading to the creation of the Soil Conservation Service. Currently, the estimates of degraded land area by the impact of that plow, a very benign-looking implement, is about 24% of the total land area of the earth, 24%, affecting several billion people. Out of that, the water erosion is 1.1 billion hectare, wind erosion 0.6 billion hectare, salinization, secondary salinization of irrigated land, about 0.9 billion hectare. Most soils which are eroded and degraded have lost as much as 25 to 75% of their original soil organic carbon stock. That's what Claire was talking about, protect it. Protect what you have. That's the reason we must learn how to protect it against erosion, against leaching, against decomposition. And that loss, really estimated several billion, several gigaton, is something that we have to put back one way or the other. With all the pros and cons, with all the debate, with all the declamation, we cannot do without putting it back. It's very difficult to create the ecosystem services. So this debate that Claire was mentioning about from the meta-analysis by different people from around the world is not new either. Actually, it started at Ohio State in 1945 by a book called Plowman's Folly by a then extension specialist, Edward Faulkner. Edward Faulkner said, I do not see any reason for plowing except weed control. But that's a serious problem. Because we did not have herbicides, we couldn't control weeds, so the plowing had to be done to turn the weed under. And when that book came, there was another book from Texas, The Furrow and Us. And that debate came out in the Time magazine. You can look it up, Time magazine. It gives you the biggest debate of the scientific community ever. And guess who won? The furrow. The furrow won. Why did furrow won? Because the plowing, Don Rikowski was here this morning, plowing increases the oxidation of organic matter. And as it increases the oxidation of organic matter, it releases nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. When we did not have fertilizer, where are those nutrients coming from? Coming from the mineralization of organic matter. More you plow, more the mineralization, more the nutrient, more the fertility. Who can deny that? So the debate was lost by Edward Faulkner. He could not win. And therefore, the plowing continued until the Dust Bowl happened later, repeated over different times. I think that debate was very much highlighted by President Dwight Eisenhower in his address, 34th. He gave an address at a university conference like here. He said, farming looks mighty easy from Washington, White House, I guess, when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles away from a cornfield. It is easy. That was his address at Bradley University in Pretoria, Illinois. And I think that continues till now. The policymakers, and I must say Claire Chanou's message that the policymakers in France and elsewhere in Europe have taken a lead on this issue where they talk about putting carbon back in soil. That is really the greatest way forward, which I hope we will do that throughout the world. That brings me to the question of agriculture. Agriculture is something which we are here used to listening. It pollutes the environment. It degrades the soil. It destroys the biota. It decreases the biodiversity. You know something? We have right to abuse or accuse agriculture only if we make a solemn pledge, I shall never eat again. If you cannot make that pledge, then we have a duty, moral duty, ethnic duty, ecological duty, philosophy, to improve upon it. We can't do without it. We have to improve upon it. So let's take a stock of agriculture. 49% of Earth's terrestrial surface is used for agriculture, almost. 77% of agriculture land, almost 4 billion hectares, is allocated to raising animals. 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals are used for irrigation. 30 to 35% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are contributed by agriculture, and yet 1 in 9 persons, 821 million people are hungry. Yet 2 to 3 in 7 are malnourished. We cannot, must not, should not let that thing continue. Something business as usual is not an option. So how do you meet the food demand? Do you go and clear more prairie? Do you go clear more area under forest? Do you irrigate more? Do you put more pesticide? Do you put more herbicides? I think we need to be very objective. I think the world already produces enough food to feed 10 billion people. That's correct. Therefore, how do you achieve food security? First, reduce waste. 30 to 50% of the food never reaches the stomach. 1 billion tons of grain never reaches the stomach. That's a crime against nature. It is. Doesn't matter how you look at it. We must reduce it. Increase access to food by addressing poverty, inequality, wars, political instability, refugees, whatever you want to call it. That's the cause of those miseries. These are the human dimensions which we must address. Improve distribution of the food properly wherever it's needed. Increase use of pulses and plant-based diet wherever possible. I think it's more intensive in terms of the inputs. And accept personal responsibility of not taking everything given to us for granted. That's a responsibility. That's an education. That's a very important part. Personal responsibility, not leaving the plate half, let's throw it away into the trash. Increasing agronomic productivity from existing land, restoring degraded lands, increasing biological fixation by legumes, and conserving some agricultural land back to nature, not expanding, back to nature, through sustainable intensification and restoration of ecosystem. Eco-intensification. What do we mean by eco-intensification and restoration? The goal is we must reconcile the need for advancing food and nutritional security with the absolute necessity of restoring and improving the environment. That's the goal. That's the issue. And agriculture can do it and should do it. This is where the farmers are the biggest, greatest steward of the environment. And we have to make sure they recognize it and the society appreciates it. And we do. Scientific community does. So what is this eco-intensification? The eco-intensification is not to get more land out of nature, not to put more chemical, not to put more water. The strategy is to produce more and more from less and less, from less land, from less water, from less input of chemicals, from less input of energy, from less emission of green gases, keep producing more and more from less and less by improving efficiency, by reducing wastage. That is science. That's the application of science of translating into action. And that is what comes through education. That's why I salute colleges such as here, where you bring up young people experiencing on hand what the translation of science into action is. So what is sustainable soil management? Dave Montgomery mentioned this morning, always replace what you remove. Soil is like a bank account, he said. You cannot keep taking out of bank account without replacing it. If you remove nutrients from soil, somehow they must get back. Replace whatever you remove. Responds widely to whatever you change. Predict what may happen by anthropogenic and natural perturbations. And enhance soil resilience. When we talk about soil protection, we want to enhance. And soil organic carbon concentration stock that Claire talked about is one of the components that determines the resilience of the soil against perturbations, against disturbances. And we must keep it somewhere about 1.5 to 2%. So that brings me to the question of what is carbon sequestration then? It's the process of transferring CO2, carbon dioxide, from the atmosphere into the soil of a land unit. That's a very important part. We had a discussion this morning about it. Of a land unit plants, plant residues, and other organic solids which are stored or retained in the unit, in that unit, as a part of the soil organic matter and has a mean long residence time. Claire went over detail on what mean residence time was by physical protection, biological protection, absorption, and all that. And essentially that's what means. When you bring in the material from another land unit, A to B, that's a distribution. You must produce the plant within that land unit to increase biomass carbon input into the soil through photosynthesis within that land unit. So everything has to come from within that. Otherwise, there are difficulties in interpreting what carbon sequestration is. Why is that necessary? Humans, 7.6 billion in 2018, 9.8 billion in 2050, projected to be 11.2 billion by 2100. Out of this, Africa and South Asia is really going to have the major contribution to the new population. Humans have not had to deal with such a drastic climate change of 2 degrees centigrade that we talked about since 10 to 12 millennia ago, the last ice age. So this is quite a drastic. Therefore, it's important to identify strategies which have both adaptation and mitigation effects, both. That's where soil and agriculture has both. It does provide adaptation and mitigation. Geologic sequestration, for example, is mitigation only. Agriculture, forestry, wetland management, restoration, conservation reserve program, they have both components. And they also generate many other ecosystem services, and Claire went into those details quite a lot. It is in this context that the importance of soils of agroecosystem can never be overemphasized, and it needs an objective and critical assessment for assessing and addressing the global issues of the 21st century. And I'm very glad this Congress is obviously very appropriate toward that, because soil matters. Soil is very important. Agriculture matters. And soil and agriculture are integral to any solution to mitigating climate change. What's the basic philosophy about carbon sequestration? The idea to create a positive carbon budget. Remember, we talked about bank account. Here is a balance. This balance has gains and losses. And gains happen by things such as biochar, compost, cover crop, root biomass, which was mentioned by Claire, crop residue. There is no single practice that can be universally applicable. There is no silver bullet. We have 300,000 types of known soil series. To assume that one practice can apply to all those soil series in all climates, in all socioeconomic conditions is rather being naive. But the goal is to create a positive budget on the basis of site-specific conditions. And these gains must be more than the losses by erosion, leaching, decomposition. We must monitor those for those sites and make sure that what we put into it within that land unit, not robbing Peter and pay Paul, within that land unit must be more. If that cannot happen, if your gains are less than the losses, don't blame on the practice. Blame on your balancing mathematics. That's very simple. So when somebody says no-till works, no-till doesn't work, they haven't done their math properly. You want to make sure if something has to happen, you create a positive carbon budget. And that's basically locals adapting science. The question has been asked many times, how much can you do? Well, these are guesses. We are improving those guesses over time. I just published a paper. It's actually began with the title, Digging Deeper in Biogeochemistry, came out in April, May. The technical potential of the soils of the world, technical, what's possible under all soils, degraded lands, cropland, agricultural rangeland, forest land, urban lands, recreational land, whatever you want to call, all of those is about 2.5 gigaton of carbon per year in soil. We have just another article, about 10 or 15 of us co-authors on it. It's going to be published next month in Journal of Soil and Water Conservation. We estimated what will happen by year 2100. We have done that 2 components. Soil have a technical potential about 178 gigaton. Vegetation, if you restore areas which require afforestation, biomass, wherever, another 160. You add those two together, roughly, it's about 330 gigaton. 0.47 gigaton is about 1 part per million of CO2. So we have a technical potential of agroecosystem of 160 parts per million of CO2 drawdown between now and 2100, if tomorrow morning we get going. Even if we achieve 1/3 of that, about 50 parts per million, that's not a small change either, especially that there are many other co-benefits of it. So this thing is very timely. This Congress is very exact on time, followed up by next year on climate change. This We should go to our policymakers, just like the French policymakers went around the scientific community. They came to Ohio State, they went to other places. Claire and her colleagues were part of that discussion. I was going to suggest some of those policymakers should come for sabbatical in the White House, maybe. I think no-till, I started working on it in 1970. This particular plot is no-till plot from West Africa in 1970. And these experiments are published in 73, 74. Some of the colleagues from Brazil, from Cerrado, who did a remarkable job there, were part of the training courses we ran. But in Africa, it was never adopted. Never. Even now. There are small places here and there. Why not? Because that crop residue is a very precious commodity. I mentioned that this morning in discussion. That crop residue is needed for making homes, for burning, for cooking fuel, for feeding to cattle, it has many other benefits. Therefore, living out the land doesn't make sense to them. Does not make sense. So just to see what happens to the carbon sequestration under no-till versus plow-till, if you plot soil organic carbon stock on x-axis and you take depth on the y-axis, you have a no-till. It has a higher concentration in the surface layer. As you go deeper to a meter depth, the carbon stock keeps on declining. Now, if you take a stock on a plow-till, it may look like this. It may have a lower in the surface because erosion, decomposition, mixing of air, oxygen, more burning, more loss. So the question is, if the no-till were to exceed in carbon sequestration compared to plow-till, then this part must exceed this part. And that analysis has to be done if you do study of soil carbon stock to deeper depths. When you do only for 5 centimeter, 10 centimeter, your conclusion is no-till is better. Not necessarily always the case. I have seen cases where you plow under the residue, where the bulge is greater than the upper part. And that's what can happen. And the only way to find that out is by proper experimentation. And here was an example of experiment. In Nigeria, we started an experiment on a flat piece of land where we have no-till in the front part of the plot. Started in 1972 with my late colleague, Tony Juo, and I started it together. He was doing chemistry, I was doing physics. We had another colleague doing microbiology. The plots in the first had all the treatments, everything the same, varieties, the fertilizer rate, the weed control, the whole lot. The back plot, everything the same, except that the crop residue was taken away, the way the farmer do. And this picture was taken 15 years after. The soil in the front had no biota, no earthworm, no termites, microbial biomass carbon was very low. The soil was approaching death, essentially. When you have no crop residue and putting fertilizer, you're killing more organisms, more earthworms. So this can happen. In fact, I personally believe very strongly the so-called green revolution bypassed sub-Saharan Africa because of that reason. The soils were taken for granted. Soils are left to fend for themselves. When you do not share wealth produced by soil with the soil properly, give its own share, the Mother Nature rebels. And when it rebels, it knows no mercy. I think this is a part which we have to understand. Soil biota is the bio-engine of the earth. And in that respect, there is no such thing as a free biofuel. Take away the crop residue and burn. You pay a very, very heavy price, ecological price, in addition to the economic price. In Coshocton and Ohio and Midwest, there was a serious drought in 2012. You might remember that. Well, we tried to repeat that experiment I showed you in Nigeria at Coshocton. We had this crop residue management experiment going on under the regional projects in 2004. In 2012, 8 years after, we took away the crop residue. Josh Benitson was my PhD student at that time. He's about 6'7". So just remember his height. 10 feet away was a plot where the residues were left on the ground. And that was a serious drought that season. So what is climate smart agriculture? climate resilient agriculture, an agriculture soil that has a resilience, that's it. I do not know what you want to call it. Keep the ground protected, keep the ground covered, return the crop residue, return the root biomass. Do not take away what belongs to the soil. That's its share. Leave it there. We have also talked about nutrient management. NPK. How about CNPK with integrated soil nutrient management rather than NPK alone with chemical? That C will make a big difference. You are protecting what you have and you are adding into it what you have. From the practical point of view, let's talk about CNPK and other things with it. So if I were to summarize how do you manage soil health to manage soil organic matter content, I think we got to have a plant that produces not only the above ground biomass, but a prolific root system. We heard its mycorrhizal association with roots. We heard about deep root system and a very prolific root system. That means the harvest index of this soil, because got a lot of photosynthesis, is going to go to the roots. Roots are not coming free. Something is paying for that roots. The plant is being asked, look, divert your biomass to roots. So there should be roots with mycorrhizal association, roots with many other benefits. We must have a mulch cover on it. We must have a cover always on it. We should observe a no-till farming. We can link it with cattle and with trees association, the mixed farming system. That would be the ideal situation of recycling and protecting the land. And in that case, you have rhizobium to fix the nitrogen in case there are legumes in the rotation. And then you apply NPK, zinc, and carbon directly to the root alongside the water at a time it's needed, at the rate it's needed, so there is no wastage in the environment. And make sure that the fertilizer use efficiency and the water use efficiency is at least 60%, at least, preferably more. So idea is not to keep adding more and more and more. The idea is to make sure the efficiency of what is added is more. That's science, how to improve the efficiency. And otherwise, you're wasting the resources, very precious resources, and polluting the environment. We also want plants that I can talk to. How? Through molecular-based signal. I would like to talk to my plant breeders, plant physiologists, plant taxonomists, whoever you wish to call them. Look, I need a plant that can tell me through molecular-based signal, I'm being attacked by a pest, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I'm nitrogen, a virus is attacking me, grasshopper is chewing my root, do something. So that we can intervene before large damage happens. That's where the future agriculture has to be, futuristic, different. Dumping water, dumping chemicals, unnecessary plowing is not scientific agriculture. We have to be science-oriented. We want to make sure, and the efficiency of utilization, that's a very critical part, very essential part of managing the science. Now, how do you achieve this? That's a question. How do you translate science into action? How do you make sure when soil is degraded and it has very low water and nutrients, and we want to improve it, we want to increase its vegetation cover so it improve the soil organic carbon, the nutrient pool. We want to keep going up the ladder and improve its soil quality, soil health and ecosystem services and functionality so it can increase the productivity, enhance the income of the farming community, improve standard of living, create political stability. Look at the places of the world where there is a lot of refugee problem, what's happening to the land and agriculture. Landscape and people are mirror images of one another. You drive through a landscape and you look at the people and you know what the land looks like. They are exactly related. And this is how you improve soil and ecosystem resilience. And we want to create those environments to do that. I think one thing before I go, it's a long saying, but I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it because I believe in it. Depleting soil organic matter and declining soil fertility, degrading soils and denuding landscapes, recurring droughts and intensifying heat waves, secondary salinization and increasing elemental imbalance, reducing water renewability and extractability and exacerbating scarcity, contaminating water and polluting air, low crop yields and perpetual hunger, poor nutrition and increasing malnourishment, marginal living and desperateness are as real threats to global peace and security as are ICBMs and nuclear weapon proliferation. Because you know why they are a threat? Because the fire that burns in the pit of an empty stomach is so intense, so ferocious, that it can only be quenched by the divine powers in a loaf of bread made from grains grown on a healthy soil. I wish I could give that message to the Secretary General of the United Nations on the World Soil Day. This is the message we need to give. This is where I think the farmers hold the key, not only to the food and nutritional security, prosperity, but also global peace. Global peace. Our Office of External Affairs should know this is where the global peace depends. So, another way to put that is here is on X-axis, security. Claire talked about it. She had an opening slide, security of politics, economics, social, environmental. On the Y-axis, security of the human, genders, societal, ethnic, national, regional, international, global. In the middle of all this is a healthy soil. Healthy soil. Soil which has living entity. Soil which has a high organic matter content. The surface horizon is rich of biota. In that soil, whatever its processes are, depends the health of soil, food security, the water security, the energy security, the climate security, the health and nutritional security, the environmental security, the political security, the national security, and of course the global peace and international security. That's the basis. Go back to soil, go back to the roots. If we want peace, go back to our soil roots. So I have 10 kind of conclusions. One is cause of soil degradation. Dave Montgomery started with this morning and did a great job. My take on that is that the biophysical process of soil degradation is driven by economic, social, and political forces. Scientific community is helpless when the social, economic, and policy issues are not taken care of. That's where somehow we need the policy people to help us. And the vulnerability of soil to degradation depends on how rather than what is grown. It's not corn or corn soybean, how you grow it through conservation agriculture, mulch farming, cover cropping, guided traffic, integrated soil nutrient management. We also talk about stewardship of soil. Stewardship is a very tricky word. And one of the things is when people are poverty-stricken, desperate, and starving, they pass on their suffering to the land. Remember I mentioned you drive through a landscape and you know exactly how people are. They are mirror images of one another. And O. Henry put it very nicely. Love and business and family and religion and art and patriotism, nothing but shadows of words when man's starving. A starving person does not know that. When we have 820 million people starving around the world and 2 to 3 billion people suffering from malnourishment, stewardship is not understood. You tell them, don't cut that tree, and they don't have fire to cook the food. What do you mean, don't cut a tree? Basic necessities have to be met. Number one priority, very high priority. Number 3 law in soil management, nutrient and carbon bank. Going back to Dave Montgomery this morning, it is not possible to take more out of a soil than what is put in it without degrading its quality. Not possible. I mentioned this morning the negative nutrient budget on a continental scale in the whole of Africa, 60 kilograms of NPK per year. Somehow, those nutrients got to get in that continent before carbon will get into it. Only by replacing what is taken can a soil be kept fertile, productive, and responsive to management. That's very important. You keep mining it, keep extracting it, keep removing things out of it, not putting back, Mother Nature will rebel. It has rebelled. We know what happened to extinct civilizations. Marginality principle. I'm not an economist, but I 100% believe in what I'm going to say here. Marginal soils, cultivated marginal inputs, produce marginal yields and support marginal living. Look around, you'll see that. Turn it around. Good soils, cultivated with good practices, produce good yields and support good living. I think the idea is to manage the best by best techniques and save the rest for nature. That's the way to go. Law number 5, organic versus inorganic. In general, plants cannot differentiate whether the nitrate and phosphates are coming from fertilizer, chemicals, or from organic. I think the strategy is how can we produce more and more from less and less? That's the question. That's the issue, producing more from less. I think that's a point that we have to keep emphasizing it. There is also a question whether soil is more important than germplasm or germplasm is more important than soil. I really think germplasm is very important, but I'm a soil scientist, so I'll tell you this, that the potential of elite varieties can never be realized unless they're grown under optimal soil condition. And sub-Saharan Africa is a very good example of that. You find out that, yes, improved varieties are being adopted everywhere, but the yield has been stagnating since the 70s because the soils on which they are grown are impoverished. So the water and nutrients cannot be extracted from a soil where they're not. And yet, if we have improved varieties, definitely the inputs of pesticides and other chemicals can be reduced. So that's a trade-off. So law number 8, soil as a sink of atmospheric CO2. Soils must be, have to be, integral to any strategy of mitigating global warming and improving the environment. Climate change is a humongous problem. And I fully agree with Claire when she said we have many options. Soil is one option, but soil has to be integral to it. We cannot leave soil out. Any strategy of leaving soil out will not be complete. It will not solve the entire problem because soil has been a major source of CO2 ever since the agriculture began. So agriculture and soil have to be solution. Whatever other components are, they are equally important and must be addressed. Law number 9, we talk about sustainable development globally. Sustainable management of soil is the engine of economic development, political stability, and transformation of rural communities, especially so in developing countries. When soils are degraded, you're thinking about economic development, not possible. Begin with the foundation. Soil is the foundation. And law number 10, which I hear quite often, traditional knowledge versus modern innovation. My take on this is sustainable management of soil implies built upon the traditional knowledge. It's not either or. You have traditional knowledge and impose upon it, build upon it the modern technology. Do not give up the modern technology. We did not have 7.6 billion people thousands of years ago when traditional knowledge are built. We have going to be more people. So let's make sure that we use the best of both. Just to summarize what was said by Claire and also by David this morning, think about a pyramid. Soils in relation to ecosystem services. Think about the base of the pyramid is the soil and the soil carbon stock of the global soil pool. Think about this pyramid having 4 walls. And those 4 walls are food security. I should have really said food and nutritional security. The second wall is the climate change adaptation mitigation of that pyramid. The third wall is the water quality and renewability. The fourth wall of that pyramid is biodiversity enhancement. If this pyramid was to be stable and stay forever to addressing those 4 issues, that means the apex where all those 4 walls meet must have a very strong glue so they don't fall apart. And that glue is political will, the policy, the people who make decisions. It is the duty of the scientific community and the general public to make sure that our policymakers understand their important role to stabilize that pyramid. Somehow, the communication between the scientific community and general public and the policymaker has to happen now, especially in this biennial election time. Our policymaker going to White House or wherever, they should understand. They have to understand. I do not see that in a forum. And I think the blame probably goes to scientific community, that includes me. We need to talk to policymakers. We really have to talk to make sure, sir, ma'am, we depend on your willpower. And that's a very important part to understand. So soil health is really a challenge to policymakers. When asked, what would I suggest to mitigate global warming, purify air and water, and end global hunger and malnutrition, the logical response would be to change the ways soils are taken for granted and abused to produce, transport, process, and consume food, and misused to procure feed, fiber, fuel, bricks, and other ecosystem services. That requires education at all levels from primary school, secondary school, college, and at policy level. A prudent strategy would imply making soil, water, and agriculture an integral part of the solution and empowering farmers. Remember this morning we were talking about ecosystem services payment. That's the empowerment. We must empowering farmers and land managers to produce more and more from less and less by reducing waste, enhancing the eco-efficiency, and restoring degraded soils, afforesting the denuded land, and saving soil and water for nature. That requires incentivization. Without that, it's an empty talk and shadows of words. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You can take your seat. Please look, Dr. Lal.
Oh.